This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. There are tons of vaccine incentives out there, but I worry about some of the combinations. Like, do you really want a donut and a beer at the same time? Marinate on that. Meanwhile, here's what we got for y'all. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on the shadowy world of for-profit adoption that has left many mothers and parents feeling exploited. Then a look at the true impact of these state-level election audits that are making waves even when they don't find fraud. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Next week, the Israeli parliament could vote to push current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu out of power. A coalition of 8 political parties reached a deal this week to form a new government. If successful, they would share a rotating leadership deal. Right-wing leader Naftali Bennett would serve as prime minister for 2 years, followed by the centrist leader Yair Lapid. For the first time in history, an Arab-Israeli party will also be a part of this coalition. Netanyahu has held the prime minister position for 12 years, longer than anyone else in history. He's become a more polarizing figure after 4 inconclusive elections in the last 2 years. He's currently on trial for corruption charges, including bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. But what's pretty wild about this coalition is that the major players don't seem to agree on anything beyond getting Netanyahu out of office.
If they will look all the time at the things that they do not agree on the policy that have to do with the settlements, on differences in economic policy, etc., this will not, they will not be able to sustain themselves for a long time.
The area now known as George Floyd Square is looking very different. Barriers around the intersection came down today. For more than a year since Floyd's death, the intersection between East 38th Street and Chicago Avenue was closed to traffic. The area turned into an autonomous zone of sorts, with police staying away to avoid tension as it became a symbol for racial justice and healing. As crews removed some of the smaller artifacts, residents responded with mixed emotions. Some businesses in the area who suffered because of the barriers and road closures were relieved. Emergency vehicles have also had trouble accessing the area to respond to nearby crime or overdoses. The iconic fist sculpture will be staying, and so will the nearby murals. City leaders have acknowledged the area will never return to its former state. In a statement today, city council members said the city is fully committed to creating a permanent memorial in the intersection. The Minneapolis Planning Commission already approved a plan to rename part of Chicago Avenue George Perry Floyd Jr. Place. The NFL says it will stop using a controversial assessment known as race norming to determine how much a former player could be paid from the league's $1 billion concussion settlement. Players could be awarded as much as $3 million for their claims, but many black players and their families say the NFL discriminated against them by using race norming in a way that assumed black players started out with lower cognitive abilities. This made it harder for black players with dementia claims to qualify for any restitution. The term itself, race norming, and the fact that the NFL in 2021 decided to stop using a discriminatory practice really set people off. But it's also important to know the initial intention of the practice. Race norming was developed in the mid-20th century to prevent racial bias in aptitude testing for folks looking for jobs through the U.S. Employment Service. Job seekers would take an aptitude test, and their scores would be compared to other scores from within the same racial or ethnic group. The NFL says they've convened a panel of neuropsychologists to find more race-neutral ways of assessing dementia claims, and claims that were initially rejected could be reviewed again, but there's no timetable for any of that. Adoption just doesn't seem like the sort of thing you'd want to pair with big profit motives. But the private adoption industry has done just that. By creating a high-dollar path for families trying to skip the line and adopt an infant, some for-profit adoption agencies stand to make big money by matching pregnant mothers with wealthy prospective parents. And all that money, and no nationwide regulation of the industry, has left the door wide open for some shady practices. Newsy's Mark Fahey and Teak Root spent the last year investigating this industry and talking to dozens of people wrapped up in it. Here's our report.
The internet is home to scores of adoption success stories. The baby finds a home, people become parents, everybody wins.
This is the sweetest thing I've ever seen.
But private adoption in the United States is also an extremely lucrative business. with inconsistent regulations and financial incentives that can lead to problems.
You feel gross because you finally figure out how they're buying you or your baby.
When someone stands to make $50,000, $100,000, some people will do a lot of untoward things to make that kind of money, and they do.
Every year, there are about 1 million families looking to adopt a child in the US, and many of those want a baby. Private domestic adoption offers the best chance of finding an infant, but the number of infants placed into new families via private adoption is estimated at less than 18,000.
It's a fundamental problem of supply and demand, and the demand so far outweighs the supply.
That dynamic has helped drive the price of a private adoption into the tens of thousands of dollars. Money that can go to for-profit agencies, facilitators, consultants, attorneys, and any number of other types of private adoption middlemen. Adoption Network Law Center in California charges more than $25,000 in fees. That doesn't even include legal costs and birth mother support, which can be thousands more. Adoption advertiser, Chosen Parents, is a middleman to middleman of sorts. It charges $18,800 for each new birth mother they find.
We have invited abuse. Anyone that knows or learns the system can exploit those loopholes very easily for financial gain. And there's no oversight. No one is paying attention.
Advocates say that financial support can be used to pressure birth mothers into going through with an adoption.
I had always wanted to be a mom. My ex brought up doing adoption, it was just being punctured. He Googled it right there and called the first place that came up. Good job, honey. The first one that came up was Adoption Network Law Center. I called my adoption counselor and I was like, what happens if I don't give my baby up? They made me feel like the adoptive parents were going to come after me for all the money they had spent. But you also can't change your mind because you don't have the money to buy it back. You have to buy your own baby back, almost.
We spoke to 13 former employees of ANLC and heard about some questionable operations.
I got to see the excitement and the beautiful parts and this amazing journey that ends up with a baby at the end. I've also seen the nasty, the dirty, I can't even explain skin crawling part of the adoption world.
The whole thing became about money and not about good adoption practices. Basically making it feel like there was no difference between selling cleaning products or placing a child for adoption. That was the end for me.
I was not willing to tell them that, the wrath of God was going to come down upon them if they didn't place the child. That is horrible. No birth mother should ever feel like that, like they were coerced.
Carrie Sweet was part of a lawsuit against her former employer in 2010. ANLC denies that they ever coerced birth mothers into giving up babies, and ANLC's former owner defends the role the company plays in adoptions.
Private adoption is mostly driven by adopting parents who, for one reason or another, can't have children themselves and really want to go the private route because they want a newborn. They want to have a little more say in who their birth parents are. This isn't for everybody. It really isn't. But people should have the opportunity and the free choice, just as a birth mom should.
But Klupp's story fits a pattern of problems with private adoption that months of reporting have uncovered. There is almost no federal regulation of the private adoption industry. That means 50 different sets of laws across the states, and they can vary widely.
There are some organizations that I've heard of that will fly girls to specific states because it's easier to have adoptions done there. The laws might be looser there.
While birth mothers moving across state lines may be relatively rare, the patchwork of laws can still play a general role in how birth and adoptive parents connect. If, for example, a private adoption middleman is looking for a baby for prospective parents in Connecticut, they may find an expectant mother in Connecticut, but then they'd have to follow that state's laws, like capping support for birth parents at $1,500. Or they could find a mother in, say, Utah, where there's no limit on the dollar amount. The federal government does not track private adoptions, but many states do record when a child is adopted across state lines. So Newsy reached out to all 50 states. Out of the 41 states that sent us data, we flagged 9 that consistently showed more children being adopted out of the state than coming in. And those states still have an outsized influence, even if you adjust for birth rates and population. These states account for about a third of the births among the states surveyed, but in 2019, they handled roughly 60% of outgoing adoptions. Part of the explanation could be demographics, but we found that these hotspots also align with what experts often consider adoption-friendly states. 6 of the 9 have no, or relatively short, waiting period after birth before a mother can consent to an adoption. In these 6 hotspots, consent cannot be revoked, and these states all allow non-residents to finalize an adoption in the state. Addressing issues in particular states may have an outsized impact, but reform advocates would like to see stronger and more consistent regulation of the industry across the nation.
The laws in most states do need to be overhauled. Unfortunately, when we do have laws that change for adoption purposes in this country, they are often changed to make adoption easier for adoptive parents and not necessarily to reflect upon the rights of the children, the adoptees who are being adopted, or the birth parents.
Advocates say that money is the root of many of the problems in private adoption.
If you're a legislator and you think, yeah, $50,000 for an adoption, that sounds fine, seems reasonable. If that's what you think, then you've missed the whole argument about the problem with mixing money with human beings. You've missed the whole argument about how coercive that can be. You've missed the whole argument about how many people that eliminates as possible parents who might make very good parents. You've missed the whole argument about how people, kids who grow up, feel about being commodified. You've missed all of that. This lack of education and understanding is a real problem in trying to get to a better place.
One possible fix is to restrict how much profit, if any, middlemen can make off the process.
Some people will say, well, that's just the free market. But most people who are willing to reflect a bit understand how a civilized society protects children and vulnerable populations. Doesn't let the free market loose on them.
By the way, that special report, Baby Brokers, was produced in partnership between Newsy and our friends over at Time. You can read more from the story on their site or on an actual magazine newsstand. Remember those? More than half a year after the 2020 election, legislators and local officials, most of them Republicans, in a handful of states are still examining 2020 election ballots. They're doing that through audits, recounts, and challenges. Experts worry that continued challenges are eroding confidence for future elections. Newsy's Stephanie Liebergen has more.
Have your IDs ready to go. Thanks for turning out.
7 months after the 2020 election, ballots are still under the microscope in a handful of states, and election experts worry the continued challenges are eroding confidence in our elections.
We are not out of the woods yet on this, and the longer that this kind of farce, audit, and continued questioning of the election is allowed to continue, the more danger that we are in.
In Arizona, the state Senate launched an audit in Maricopa County in April, but the voting machines had already been tested twice, and the 2.1 million ballots were already subject to 3 audits. All of those checks showed the 2020 election results were fair and accurate, but Maricopa County's ballots are undergoing yet another inspection.
Do you know what they're looking for or what they think they're going to find?
You know, I think at the end of the day, what this is designed to do is continue to undermine the integrity of our elections, put questions in people's minds that they can't trust future elections.
And Arizona isn't alone. The Speaker of the Wisconsin Assembly hired police officers to look into the 2020 election. Sheboygan County, Michigan officials want to allow an outside group to audit their voting machines. And in Georgia, a group of residents filed a lawsuit to try to get access to Fulton County's mail-in ballots.
We don't know until we've actually seen them, but there appear to be tens of thousands that could be potentially counterfeit, and that could have been enough to switch the results here in Georgia.
They believe examining ballot markings and paper folds will prove that fraudulent votes were counted. But David Becker from the Center for Election Innovation and Research says benign reasons could explain what they think is fraud.
There are tons of reasons ballots might not be folded. It might be that a mail ballot was actually returned by hand. It might be that it was returned in a different kind of envelope that was given.
Every legal vote will count.
Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is confident in the 2020 election results. His office completed a risk-limiting audit which included a hand count of the state's 5 million ballots, but he supports the citizen effort in Fulton County, saying the ballot inspection would provide another layer of transparency. Small discrepancies are to be expected with election audits, but sometimes they can uncover concerning errors. That's what happened in Windham, New Hampshire with a race for state representative. Out of 10,000 ballots cast, the initial recount found 300 more votes for some candidates and 100 less for another. The investigation determined the problem stemmed from how the ballots were folded. All told, none of the various recounts, audits, or legal challenges have impacted the results of the presidential election. Experts say that should give voters more confidence, not less.
We're seeing better vote casting methods with paper ballots. We're seeing more audits with better methodology. Things are trending in the right direction. So the evidence is all stacked in, yes, our elections are getting more secure.
Despite that, polling shows large numbers of Republican voters still don't trust the 2020 election results. And it so far seems unlikely that any number of audits or recounts will change that.
It happens in a democracy. There's a winning side when there's a losing side. But I think it has to start with truth. And to be honest, also that benefits the losing side. A side that has lost an election and then misdiagnoses the reason that they lost is doomed to continue losing elections.
Stephanie Liebergen, Newsy, Washington.
We're not going anywhere, but you are. So we'll meet back here when you're back. Hospitals across the country are still bleeding cash because of the pandemic. Last year alone, dozens of hospitals were forced to close or file for bankruptcy. That has left communities struggling to find access to emergency care. National reporter Chris Conti takes a closer look at what hospitals say they need to survive.
A global pandemic has not done any favors for hospitals across America. Lifelines for countless communities, and many are now on life support.
We were hit earlier, we were hit harder, and we were hit longer by COVID.
Deborah Wilson is the CEO of Lawrence General Hospital, a hospital which in 2021 is expected to lose about $20 million.
We need to actually make sure that institutions are available to be impactful.
With those kinds of losses, the hospital is being forced to implement $6 million in cuts. 57 nurses, doctors, and staff are being let go. But they are far from the only hospital left in financial distress because of the pandemic.
Before COVID, we had a weak balance sheet.
So what's happening? Many hospitals are being asked to repay emergency Medicaid reimbursements they were granted during COVID. There have also been delays in dispersing COVID-19 relief money. By some estimates, hospitals could still be looking at $53 billion in revenue loss for 2021. $27 billion of that from outpatient care, $17 billion from inpatient care, and about $9 billion from emergency room visits being down.
The emergency room is sort of their front door, and a lot of revenue comes in through the emergency room.
Ken Kaufman is an industry expert. While the pandemic appears to be winding down, many hospitals still aren't seeing the volumes of patients they need to stem their financial bleeding.
We've had a very uneven recovery in the hospital world.
Hospitals are also being squeezed in other ways. Labor costs are up 14%. Supply costs are up 13%. Drug expenses up 17%.
Are we still going to lose some more hospitals because of this?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it.
47 hospitals across the country closed or filed for bankruptcy last year. It's patients and communities who are ultimately hurt the most when that happens.
We are necessary for this community. This is a matter of life and death.
Hospitals like Lawrence General are once again asking the federal government to step in and provide some kind of help.
If you ever told me that we would not have received any relief since July of last year, I would have thought that was inconceivable.
Until then, though, the financial health of many of this nation's hospitals will remain uncertain. I'm Chris Conti.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. It's a great way to give us feedback or invite me to your next outdoor gathering. Pros, I'm a fun hang. Cons, I clearly haven't socialized a bunch, so the first hour might be a wash. LGBTQ youth already experience higher levels of isolation, and those feelings were heightened during the pandemic. Because of that, one group is using the strains of the pandemic to help more LGBTQ youth in their community. National reporter Dan Grossman explains how.
Pictures. I'm really excited for that.
If you spend just a few minutes inside this room,
Just not to touch your...
it is hard to ignore the infectious nature of these laughs.
But it was so funny because I was like, okay, I'm gonna go get one and we can match. And he was like, no, this is my shirt. I was like, Dad, you're not even queer.
They are genuine, forged from the tight bonds between those who share this space.
There's nothing like your first queer event.
Forged from the pain hidden behind their bright eyes.
You know, trauma sometimes is most easily digested through laughter and joking, because just because someone's happy or joking doesn't mean that they aren't, you know, having trouble.
During the pandemic, a survey of more than 35,000 LGBTQ youth in our country found that 80% had said the pandemic made their living situations more stressful. Nearly 2/3 said they were not living in LGBTQ affirming households, and nearly 3/4 said their mental health was poor most of the time or always during COVID.
I think people think our lives are tragic because we are at risk for a lot of negative health outcomes. That's just a fact. But that's not because of our queerness. It's because of society's response to our queerness, right?
Alyssa Smith works at Inside Out Youth Services in Colorado Springs, Colorado, a group dedicated to helping LGBTQ youth. She knows all too well the struggles her peers face. The county in which they are located faces some of the highest suicide rates among LGBTQ youth in the country.
Our work is even more important, even more life-saving.
Jesse Pocock is the group's executive director and figured during the pandemic something had to change. Around 40% of youth experiencing homelessness in the country are LGBTQ, so the group opened a homeless shelter in town last winter. During the months it was open, the shelter provided 124 young people a warm meal in bed and helped 35 of them, or 28%, exit homelessness.
One of the things that I notice, when a young person feels safe, they fall asleep. So this is a fun thing that people don't think about. And I always know we're doing our job when I see a young person on the couch taking a nap. It means they feel safe.
Despite the strides it has made, the group still faces below normal donations and funding. It needs a full-time therapist and could use more people like Alyssa. Who knows, these laughs are small building blocks to overcoming the isolation and trauma they may mask.
They are loved here, and that is huge.
I'm Dan Grossman.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back next week for more In the Loop. Same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.